Have you ever thought of buying a cheap Porsche 911?
I did just that and have driven more than 1,500 days in what was the cheapest Porsche 911 in the country at the time of purchase. But daily driving a cheap Porsche isn't all sunshine and lollipops. Knowing the ups and downs would have made the experience 10 times better in half the time.
Here are 20 brutal truths I've learned from driving a cheap Porsche 911.
Lesson 1.
Imagine you're driving a Porsche 911 in perfect silence as the scenery whizzes by.
Taking corners at speed without a sound. This may be what sports cars are like in the future, but it just feels wrong. The thing is, unless you really rev it out, the stock exhaust in this 1999 Porsche 911 doesn't have much of an exhaust note. So make sure to upgrade the exhaust right away, and it can go from this to this. Lesson 2. Have you ever had dust thrown at you? Experiencing dirt particles coming at your face is only slightly better than a kick in the head. The thing is, you can get the same experience in an old Porsche. This is thanks to aging glue, allowing foam inside the air conditioner ducting to fly at you. So watch out for AC foam and enjoy cleaning out the vents. Lesson 3. Do you remember 1999? Worrying about what would happen to computers during Y2K? Renting movies at Blockbuster and listening to music on CDs. This Porsche 911 is ready to party like it's 1999, and the stock stereo shows it. Fortunately, putting in a modern stereo system will make it feel much newer and enable you to use CarPlay or Android Audio. Lesson 4. Have you ever rubbed your hand over carpet? You can feel each individual fiber and it gives you a sense of what direction the fibers are laying. But what does this have to do with Porsches? Much in the same way, the steering feel, especially on the older Porsches, communicates what the road surface is like. This 1999 911 has the perfect amount of power assistance at low speed and feel of the road. And just remember, when driving any Porsche, it's all about the steering feel. Lesson 5.
If you think of a modern car interior, fit and finish has come a long way over the past 25 years.
Even standard cars usually have an interior that presents as high-end. If you look at a new 911, the interior is very luxurious. But things weren't always this way. Back in model year 1999, when the 996 generation of the Porsche 911 became available, the interior had a bold design and a lot of cheap-looking plastics. While it's very usable, the interior will get noticeable wear and tear. But it's nothing that some time and money can't fix. Lesson 6. Do you remember when cars didn't have cup holders? Driving had a lot less distractions. But these days, even a sports car will often have at least 2 cup holders. This 25-year-old 911 doesn't come with any cup holders as standard, and the optional cup holders are just okay. Fortunately, there are solutions that make a Starbucks run much better. Lesson 7. Do you remember the first time you saw a Porsche 911? When you think back to that car, the headlights were probably circular. In fact, all Porsche 911s have had round headlights. That is with the exception of the 930 slat nose and the 996 generation 911. Many people hate on the 996 style headlights. But the thing is that they start to grow on you, and eventually you start to think that the headlights are beautiful. And no, I haven't been brainwashed. Lesson 8. Imagine pulling up on a car in your Porsche to ask if they have any Grey Poupon, and you hear this. Yeah, that's not the sound of what you want in your Porsche. But when you get a cheap older 911, chances are the window regulators will go out. Replacement parts aren't that expensive, but replacing window regulators is a pain. Lesson 9. When you hear that you need to lower an engine to do many jobs, your first reaction is to run the other way. The thing is that jobs like replacing the water pump or air oil separator require the engine to be lowered in a 911. But doing so isn't a very hard task, and lowering the engine makes some jobs much easier. Just make sure you invest in a good floor jack before doing this. Lesson 10.
Before I purchased this 911, my previous Porsche was an early Boxster.
The 5-speed manual was fun to drive hard. That works well on a back road, but I once had to drive from San Jose to my house that was in the Modesto area at the time. Traffic was so bad and my leg hurt like crazy after that drive. So much so that my knee locked up for a few days. The Tiptronic automatic transmission during this time period was much slower shifting, but it makes traffic bearable. It's also a reason that this was the cheapest 911 in the country. Lesson 11. A few months ago, this cheap 911 developed a misfire. I used my code reader, and one code showed that the misfire was in cylinder number 3 of the flat 6 engine. Well, I quickly looked up the codes and then changed the spark plugs and the ignition coils. But that didn't help at all. I then reread the codes and realized that the issue was with the fuel injectors. Fuel injector cleaner didn't do anything, so I was about to order new fuel injectors for cylinder number 3. Fortunately, I thought I would take a quick look first. When I got in there to take a look at the fuel injector, I noticed that a wire to the fuel injector wasn't fully locked onto its connection. I was able to reconnect it and get it to lock on properly, and the misfire went away. So always look into the simple repairs first. Lesson 12. Have you ever dreamed of owning a blue chip Porsche? Perhaps a 911 GT3 or a Cayman GT4 RS. The thing is, you won't want to really modify one of these outside of perhaps a louder exhaust. If you're into that sort of thing, that's where having a cheap Porsche is nice, because it allows for guilt-free modifications. Lesson 13. Have you ever played a racing game on your gaming console? Even if you have a full steering wheel and pedal setup, it feels numb. Unfortunately, that is the way that many modern cars feel. There just isn't that direct connection. Electronic steering is part of this, but is drive-by-wire that finishes the disconnected feeling. The wonderful thing is this old Porsche is the last year you can get one with a cable-driven throttle body. And a cable-driven throttle body makes for a more connected analog experience. Lesson 14. When you think of a sports car, you probably think of a small two-seater performance machine. The Porsche Boxer that I daily drove before this old 911 was exactly that. It was a great car, but when I wanted to take my kids with me, I was forced to choose just one of them. Fortunately, the 911 has small back seats. They don't work well for adults, but for younger children, they are perfect. And taking the kiddos makes it more fun. Lesson 15.
When I replaced the engine mounts, it was a pretty easy job.
That is, once I had the correct tools. I had a small floor jack that for this job just wasn't big enough to raise the engine when needed. Fortunately, Lowe's was right down the street. They aren't a sponsor yet, but they are conveniently located. So owning a cheap Porsche is simply an excuse to buy tools. Lesson 16. If you throw a dart backwards, it will flip around due to the weight placement. This physics lesson shows why the engine placement of the 911 seems like a crazy design flaw. But over the years, Porsche has engineered the suspension and used technology to create a more neutral handling car that seems to defy the laws of physics. The thing about having the engine weight over the rear axle is you get tons of traction coming out of a corner. And this traction off of curves certainly adds to the thrills. Lesson 17. Have you ever been in a Tesla? Then you know what the experience is like of a car driving you. Even when not in full self-driving mode, it doesn't feel like you are in full control. The same can be said to one degree or another to just about any modern vehicle that you'll find at any dealership. The thing about a cheap older Porsche is that there aren't many electronic aids. This 1999 911 only has basic traction control. This means you feel like you are in complete control of the entire driving experience. Limited electronic assistance offers a more rewarding experience. Lesson 18. When you think of a sports car, do you think of tiny trunk space? There is a reason for this, as most two-door sports cars don't make it easy to carry much more than a passenger. The Porsche 911 is one of the few exceptions to this rule. You can easily fit a large suitcase in the front. This makes it simply great when it's time for a weekend getaway. Lesson 19. Have you ever thought about using a sledgehammer to put nails in a piece of wood? Sure, it's possible, but that is way too much power for the job. That's kind of what it's like driving a modern high horsepower sports car on the road. You just simply can't use all that power without going to jail. The thing about this old cheap Porsche 911 is that with just under 300 horsepower, it's the right amount of power for the road. You can use more of the power, more of the time without getting into trouble. Lesson 20.
I purchased this old Porsche 911 in Monterey, California.
When driving the roughly hour and a half back to my home, a rare thing happened in California. It rained. This meant I needed to use the windshield wipers on my 911. Unfortunately, the wiper blades were old and likely hadn't been used for a while. This resulted in the wiper blade coming loose, and the metal from the wiper made a score in the windshield. So make sure you replace windshield wiper blades, or you may need a new windshield.
The thing is, this is just one person's experience with a Porsche. But I've interviewed over 1,000 Porsche owners and learned this.